Hello, everybody, and welcome to this presentation. My name is Vjekoslav Babic. I'm an MVP for NAV from Croatia, and today I'm going to present a session about control add-ins for the RoleTailored Client in NAV 2013 R2. The reason why this is R2 is because at the time when this session was announced to Luke, we didn't know the date when 2015 would be shipped or if it would be shipped in time. But most of the things, if not really everything from what I'm going to show today, will be presented, actually everything will be presented on 2015, but most of it or everything of it just works on 2013 R2. So essentially all of this is compatible. So what are we going to do today? Actually, we're going to talk about the cross-client control add-ins, essentially the control add-ins which work in both the Windows and the web client. When I say the web client, it of course includes the web client and the tablet client. So we are going to first see how to create a Windows client control add-in, because you need to understand that process before you can develop the JavaScript or actually the cross-client control add-in. We're not going to spend too much time there. We're going to see or actually discuss about the extensibility framework in general. We're going to see which functions it has, how it actually operates. Then we're going to create a cross-client control add-in from scratch. Actually, it's a simple process, so you will see how to do it from the beginning. And then as we go, I'm going to give you tips and tricks and some best practices to learn how to actually use different control add-ins. Let me see who has written control add-ins. Okay, quite a lot of you actually. Who has written JavaScript control add-ins? Okay, fewer hands in the air. I assume that I don't have to explain why we need the control add-ins. But before I do that, you know, I was really surprised here because everybody was talking about NAV 2015, and nobody mentioned the new page type that we have. It's the semi-transparent, borderless, draggable, styleful, standard dialog. Have you heard of that page type? No? So here I'm going to the RTC client, and then I'm going to click this set password. And this thing which opens is essentially a form, actually a page. So I can drag it around, it's semi-transparent as you can see. And to prove that it is a page control, I can open this, a very fancy page here. I can add a new control to it, user name. I'll save it, and then I'll run it from here. And there it is. So this is actually not a page type, obviously. So we are not talking about a new page type. What this thing is essentially a control add-in. It's essentially a Windows Forms control add-in which allows you to style your pages, which are in fact Windows Forms, as you want. So maybe it didn't cross your mind, but every page in NAV is standard Windows form, and you can do whatever you want with it. So this session is not going to be about that. This is just to tease you a little bit to show what kinds of things are possible. And of course, you'll find the code for this on my blog. I will publish it this afternoon. I don't think that I need to explain the reason why we have control add-ins. I will rather just show a couple of advanced control add-ins, interactive control add-ins, which work in both Windows client and both of the web clients. So let's take a look at a couple of advanced extensibility demos. I'll start with my customer list. This is probably shown so many times already, but still, I'm opening my customer card page, and here I have this how to find them fact box, which is essentially a Bing Maps control. Of course, if I run it in a tablet client, I just couldn't make the real tablet client work off my machine yesterday. I spent like 3 hours, and it's funny. It's about the certificate. So I'm showing it from the browser, not from the client. So here I'm going to customers, and then I'm opening a customer page. And here, of course, this is the same control add-in. Another control add-in that I've showcased so many times already, so maybe I'll bore you to death this time, but it's this drag and drop control add-in. So here I have some bicycle images, and I'm just going to drag this bicycle into here. And it's automatically saved in the database, and then I can take a touring bicycle, which is a little bit more advanced thing, or I can select, for example, front wheel and drag it and drop it here. So, and this, of course, works also from the web client. Let me actually prove it. So if I go to the web client and then go to items, and then go to, for example, spokes, and then take those spokes and drag them and drop them here, it works, and they're now available, of course, in the Windows client. I cannot show this from the tablet client. Who knows why? There is no drag and drop. Very simple. So, and again, I'm not going to show how these things were developed. All of these examples are already on my blog, and what I will do here today is actually just go and explain the process, explain the concepts, and give some tips and tricks and best practices as we go. So, how do we develop a control add-in? It's a thing that you require Visual Studio for. So you will need to learn at least a little bit of C# if you want to write control add-ins, and if you want to write cross-client control add-ins, you will have to learn quite some, I would dare say, JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, essentially the web technologies. These steps that we have here are the steps that are necessary for all control add-ins. So first thing is we need to create an assembly in Visual Studio. Then we need to sign that assembly. It is a prerequisite. Then we need to deploy this assembly. It's the same process as with regular .NET controls, or actually .NET assemblies. You just copy them. You must put them in the add-ins folder for the client. Remember one thing, control add-ins only work from the client add-ins folder. You can deploy them to the server. Technically, they should be auto-deployed to the client then. But you cannot deploy them to global assembly cache. That's something that just will not work. So you have to put them in the add-ins folder. So it's essentially the three-step process. You copy the assembly to add-ins. Then you have to define an add-ins definition inside NAV. And then you have to assign the control add-in property on a page where you want to use it. So let's take a look how to develop a very simple control add-in. So I'm going to Visual Studio. I'm going to start with a new project. Don't worry about these messages. I have paths which are just too long. So it's complaining about path line. So I will start with simple control. So it's a class library. Here I have one class. Before I can use that class, I need to reference some external assemblies. I essentially need to reference the extensibility assembly from Microsoft Dynamics NAV. So I'm going to add reference, and then I'm going to browse, and then I can click this browse button and look for Microsoft.dynamics.framework.ui.extensibility.dll. Remember that this DLL is version specific. So if you want to develop control add-ins for 2013, you have to go to 7.0 folder and then select that. For 2013 R2, it's 7.1 folder. And here in 2015, you have to go to 8.0 folder and select. Essentially, if you want to have your control add-in to work with all three versions, even though all the code is compatible, you would have to recompile it 3 times, or actually somehow reference all 3. It would be a tricky thing to do. And then essentially select the right one. Like you can version your control add-ins if you want inside your assembly. So I'm selecting the one from 8.0. I can go to add, and then I will just click OK. So this makes my class able to talk to NAV. So I can prove that immediately because what I want to do with this class, I want to export it to NAV. So I will decorate the class with the control add-in export attribute. It automatically uses my Microsoft Dynamics Framework UI extensibility namespace. So here I will add a name. This can be anything. I'll just call it TechDays Live Demo. It is any string, but this is the string that you will use to identify the control from within NAV. So it's important that it matches whatever you configure in NAV. It has to be here as well. So this class 1, the name doesn't really matter, so I'm not changing it here. What matters is that I inherit it from something. I have to inherit it from one of the available control add-in types. So I'm usually starting the demo with string control add-in base. So this is the base class for all controls that accept string as the data source. So the control that I create will be automatically bound to a page, to a source expression. So if I bind this control to a data field in a table, it will automatically be linked. So when I change it in my control, it automatically changes in the database, just like any regular field control in NAV. So my compiler is complaining, so I need to actually add one method, which is create control method, which returns an instance of a system Windows Forms control. You see that it's again complaining. There is one more assembly that I need to reference. I need to reference the system.windows.forms assembly, because this is a system.windows.forms application. So again, I go to references, add reference, assemblies, and then I look for system.windows.forms. I select that assembly, click OK, and now this is OK. I'll take it from here and just add it here. So using system.windows.forms. So what I need to do here is simply return a new control. So I'm not doing any fancy demo, I'm just returning a simple text box which is going to be colored differently so that we can really see that it's a different thing being shown in the page. So we'll just say return new text box, and then I will say back color is, okay, here to be able to color this I need yet another assembly which is systems.drawing. So I'm going to system.drawing. Okay, and here I will just say color light sky blue. Okay, it should be visible enough. So at this stage, essentially I have all the code I need, and it's going to be data bound. Next step is I have to sign this control. So it's the same process that you might have seen yesterday if you have been at the .NET presentation. So I'm going to select properties, sign the assembly. I'll create a new file. You can reuse an existing file if you have it. So it's going to be control add in, no password, and that's this part. So I will rebuild this solution. I have some bugs. Actually, not bugs. Syntax errors. Yeah, I don't need this. Yeah. So at this stage, I have my DLL, and I'm ready to deploy it. So I'm going to my folder in File Explorer, bin, debug, and then I have simplecontrol.dll. I'm copying that, and I'm pasting that into add-ins client. So it's here now. My next step is to register the control add-in in NAV. So I'm searching for the control add-ins page, and here I'll click new. So I need to specify the name of the control. It is this string that I've used in the control and export attribute. So it's TechDays live demo. I'm putting it here. I need the public key token. Now this is a trickier thing. I'm copying my path here. I'm going to my developer command prompt, and I will just get there and then say sn minus capital T and then simple control.dll. And here I have my public key token. So I will now copy that public key token. And paste it here. That's all. And now I'm ready to use this on a page. Let me go to vendor card. And let's bind this to the address field. So I'm selecting the address field, and then in the control add-in property, I will select TechDays live demo. I'll save this. I will run the vendor page, and here I can see that my address text box is actually blue. I can change the value in there, go to previous, sorry, next, and then previous, and verify that it really is accepting and interacting with my controller in definition. So that was essentially all you need to do to create a simple controller. Everything else is nothing but your knowledge or your proficiency with system.windows.forms. Anything that you could do in .NET, you could obviously do here, as you've seen at the beginning of the presentation with that fancy looking page. There is one best practice that I can give to you, which is to include an add-in ready event at all times in your control add-in. It's very important because you need to know when your page is ready to interact with the control add-in. For example, you might add some methods or properties or even events to your control add-in, and actually events are not a problem, but you might want to call a method, like, for example, set color to something. And if you call a method or set a property on a control which hasn't yet been instantiated, then you will see an error. So that's why we need to have a control add-in ready event or something of the sort to notify CAL that we are now ready to talk to the control. So let me see why is it bad to not have a control add-ins ready event. So I'm going here. I will close my development environment and my RTC client because I need to redeploy. Then I will just open them both again. And I'm going back to my Visual Studio. Here I will add a new property. So I will add public bool important, and then get, return, and then actually I need an instance of my control, so I will just store it here, private text box, text box. I'm changing my create control into text box is new text box, and then return text box. So here I will return text box.color equals color.red and set text box back color equals value, and then color red, color light sky blue. So what I did is essentially I'm assigning a color. If I set this property to true, the color will be red. If I set it to false, it will light sky blue. And to be able to access that property from CAL, I need to decorate it with the application visible attribute. So I'm adding this application visible attribute. I'm rebuilding the solution. So it has succeeded. I will now redeploy my control add-in. So I'm just going back to my folder, copying the DLL, pasting it back here. And now I'm ready to actually try to set this property from within CL. So let's start with on open page trigger. I will go to my cur page, controls, and then find the address control. Actually, it needs to have a name, so I will add, I'll call it address control add-in. I'm going back to my on open page trigger, and then I will access this important property. I will start with setting it to true. Okay, let's see if it works. So I will go to my, actually I will run from here. So if I take a look, I'm getting an error. So it tells me control add-in on control add-in page has not been instantiated. So before I can talk to this control, I must do something. I must let my page know it is now okay to set properties in there. So this is this is what you need to do. Let me actually hide this magnifier thing again. Now, how to raise this controller in Ready? It's easy to add this event, but how do we call this add-in event? Let me actually first declare the event and then show the problems with it. So here, I could easily say that I need to have an event. I'll call this event, so public event method invoker control add in ready. And of course, I need to make it application visible. So this makes it visible to CAL. Let me again restart my clients. So I will rebuild the solution. Okay, it's now rebuilt. Okay, this event is never used. So never mind so far. If I do this, if control add in ready, and then actually fire that event, what is the problem? Can you see the problem? There are actually two problems. First, I didn't yet return this text box. So I'm firing an event before I've even got the instance. So if I get this control add in ready event in my page and write any code in it to talk to the control isn't there yet. It's being instantiated. So technically, I could try to do a funny thing like try and then finally and then this, but don't. We'll just break things. So don't do this. You need to keep in mind that events, actually everything in NAV should be single-threaded. This try finally thing kind of changes the execution flow of your code. Technically, it would work in your application, but it might break NAV. So don't do that. You need to be smarter than this. So essentially, you need to fire this event somewhere else. So I'm going to clean this up. So I'm back where I was. So to properly fire this event, I need to attach my event to some other event which happens. There are several candidates. One typical candidate is on-parent change event. So you instantiate the control. It doesn't have a parent yet. You are just passing it on to the framework. When the framework puts it into the page, you get this parent changed event. And that's the situation when the control is both instantiated and it is in the page already. The second one is handle created event, where you actually have, it happens when this is placed for the first time into the page. The reason why I suggest, or actually it's not my trick, I have to give full credit to Arnd Jan Kaufman for this. It's the handle created event. This event fires only once when the control has been first placed on a container. So it doesn't exist only in memory, it actually is present on the page. So if you attach your control add in ready to this event handler, then you are guaranteed to receive it when it's really ready to talk to and when the control, and you're going to receive it only once. The parent changed event might occasionally fire multiple times. So you don't want that one. You actually want to attach it to the one that will fire, surely fire, and fire only once. So let's do that. Here I will do, actually, after my text box is instantiated, I will do text box and then handle created and then declare a lambda and just here put my if control add in ready is not null, then I'm invoking it. So essentially this will fire as soon as the control is ready. I'm going to show another trick here. I'm just going to set a breakpoint on there. And then I'm going to rebuild this solution, redeploy the DLL. Okay, starting my development environment. Here, when you change the definition of the control, you don't immediately see the events inside. So here, I don't see the event. What I need to do is essentially rebind the control. So I'm going to the control add-ins property. I'm taking it out. and then I'm putting it back. So here I have my control add-in ready event. And here I can essentially put this important is true. I'll save that. Let me run my client for Windows. Then let me attach my debugger to the client. So I'm going to debug, attach the process, and then Microsoft Dynamics. Actually, I will put one more breakpoint in here. So the control is not yet loaded, but it doesn't mean it will not be. So I'm running the page. Okay, I get my debugger here. So I can debug over my CL code. So this is now executing. This is executing, but I'm not getting into this event because it's a lambda, essentially an anonymous method bound through this lambda to this trigger. So I can run. And then at one point, I will get a breakpoint here. I will just take a look at this control add-in ready. Essentially, I forgot to show what I intended to. So here, it is obviously red. Let me restart this page and do just one more thing. So here, if you take a look, if I run this and go there, this control add-in ready, it's null. It has not yet been assigned. And that's why you wouldn't even be able to fire that. So, and when I run it again, here control add-in ready is not null anymore, and it's obviously firing inside CL. So that's just one important thing to remember. Always use it. Otherwise, you will never be able to know when exactly you are ready to talk to it. Let's take a look a little bit at the control add-in framework history. So at this stage, I will stop talking about Windows controls, and we are immediately shifting into the control add-ins for the JavaScript. So in 2009 SP1, there was the first extensibility framework. So as early as that version, you could write extensibility controls. There were some, actually, a lot of limitations with that framework, but it was a fairly good proof of concept. And Microsoft has delivered some pretty advanced control add-ins which used that specific framework. In 2013, we have got an updated framework which allowed us to actually expose methods and properties and events from our control add-in and actually respond, bind the events to the control add-in, etc. But the biggest problem was in 2013, we have the Windows client and the web client. And obviously, if you write a Windows Forms control add-in, it cannot work in the web client. Just no way to make it work. So in 2013 R2, what Microsoft has delivered is a new framework, which is essentially an extension of the existing one, which allows you to write JavaScript code. Essentially, you don't have a Windows Forms container where Windows Forms controls are placed. Instead, you get, in the Windows client, you get a browser control, which loads an HTML document, which loads your control and runs it as an HTML. And you have a framework which allows NAV to talk to that browser document, which is loaded in that browser control. Whereas on the web client and the tablet client, you get an iframe control, which again loads the same document and technically does the same thing as the Windows Forms. So in essence, you have one framework which targets all the clients. You just need to write everything in JavaScript and HTML. So this extensibility in 2013 is based fully on JavaScript and HTML. And many people ask, is it HTML5? Yes, it is. So it's fully HTML5. There are no limitations. It is supported on all clients. The best benefit of this is that it's fully self-contained. So essentially, you need to develop it initially in the Visual Studio because you need to provide a DLL with a structure of your control add-in. And this structure is actually not a class, it's an interface. And the only purpose it serves is to actually allow CAL to know what exactly is the content of my control add-in. So which methods, which events, no properties in JavaScript. So you don't need this DLL, you don't need to deploy the DLL. Essentially, everything you have is a bunch of JavaScript files, CSS files, maybe HTML files, and one XML file. You put them together in a zip file and just upload them to the database. And then when the control needs to run, what happens is that service tier checks if the client already has it. If not, it sends this zip, unzips it there, and creates an HTML document on the fly and loads your stuff into that document and runs it. So no deployment required. And as I said, Windows Forms is fully supported on the Windows client, but also this framework is fully supported on the Windows client. So this is the content of the cross-client control add-in. We need to have a .NET interface. As I said, it needs to explain to CAL which methods and which events are there. So that's the first thing. Then we need an XML manifest file. This manifest file describes the control add-in. It tells the framework which scripts you're using, which CSS files you're using, which images you are using. It allows you to put some script code directly in there into the manifest, and it declares the size and like the flexibility of that size of the client area that the control add-in is going to consume. So essentially, that's the manifest file. Then you have JavaScript code. We have different ways of putting JavaScript code into the control add-in. And then optionally, we may have images. We can embed images into the resource, and then on demand, they are extracted from the zip and loaded onto the control. And also style sheets. If you want to style your controls, you will need a style sheet. You can also put it into actually somehow into the manifest or actually into the JavaScript code which instantiates your control. So it's up to you. These two are really optional. So after you develop the first stage of a cross-client control add-in, which is essentially the same thing as what we have seen so far, you start with the Visual Studio, you create an interface, you add this control add-in export attribute, you add any methods and any events, you decorate them with the application visible, you sign it, you deploy it to the client just for CAL to be able to see it, and then after that, you have 4 more steps. First, you have to create the manifest, then you have to add the resources necessary. You need to zip those manifests and resources into this zip file which has a specific structure, and then you need to import this resource file into the control add-in. One tip that I'm going to give to you, and actually this is going to be a template that you can download from my blog, create a Visual Studio project template which has all that already in place. And then you really don't need to do anything. You just start a new project from that template, and it immediately has all of this content inside. And another one is run Visual Studio as administrator, because then you will be able to auto-deploy from Visual Studio to Microsoft Dynamics NAV client. So let's take a look. I'm going to develop a simple JavaScript control add-in using this simple template that I've prepared. So I'm closing Visual Studio, and I will start it as administrator. I'll click New Project. And here in my Visual C# templates, at the bottom I have some custom templates that I've developed. So here I have this Microsoft Dynamics NAV 2015 Simple Extensibility Control, the name which makes it throw this error message because it's just too long to be a path. So I have to shorten the name of my project. I'll just call it TechDays Simple. Okay. So when I click OK, what I have here is this iSimple Extensibility Control interface. I already have all the references I need to the extensibility framework here. And in this interface, I have some methods and events. So first, I have onControl add-in ready. Even though with JavaScript controls it's a little different, still you need something like that. You need to inform CL when it's ready to talk to JavaScript. Then I have one method, send data to control. When NAV needs to send something to control, it can use this method. And then this event data, on data received from control, which is when JavaScript needs to send something to the client. I will explain those two things a bit later. And here I have this control add-in export. I will just call it TechDays simple template demo. So you put your name there, and you're almost good to go. Here I have resources. I have my manifest. Let me see the manifest. So manifest references this script, control.js, which is essentially where you need to put your custom code. So you open this script folder, and then control.js. This is where you put the control. Okay? Then manifest also references a default style sheet. So here is a default style sheet, which just makes the font family Seago UI and font size 9 pt. So you can actually use this default CSS to add your CSS code into it. Then in the manifest, I have this script URLs block. Here I can load external scripts. So here I'm loading jQuery and jQuery UI from Microsoft CDN. So this is a URL which is guaranteed to work. Microsoft is never going to change it, or at least that's what they say. So you can download those scripts from the internet. Alternatively, you can download them and put them into your scripts folder and reference them from there. In that case, they're not loaded from the internet, they're loaded from the resource. It will perform better, especially in the situations where your users are not expected to be connected to the internet. Okay, I don't see too many of those, but still, this might be a requirement. So you can really download them and put them as scripts in there. Then I have my script block here. This script block essentially attaches a function to the document ready event in jQuery, where I call initialize control function. It is in my control.js. So here I take a reference to this control add-in. This is the container control, the iframe control that hosts, or actually it's not an iframe, it's actually a div within the iframe. So it is the container for where we need to put our stuff. And then I use jQuery here to append some NAV control. So here is some blank template. What I'm going to do here is put input type equals button, value is click me, on click equals alert, and then hello world. Let me see, did I just take this on click out. So on click goes in here. I've messed it up. Sorry. It's adding too many of those. I'm just going to make it simple. I'm just going to add input type is button, and then value is click me, and then just close it. I don't have too much time, and it's really a simple demo. So here I will just save this control.js. So let's go back to manifest. After it initializes the control, it inserts this HTML into the page. It calls Microsoft Dynamics NAV invoke extensibility method. It essentially raises an event trigger in NAV by name. So here I say on control add-in ready. It is going to be this event here. Okay. So that's the last thing that happens in the manifest. And then here I have requested height 200, requested with 200, vertical stretch false, horizontal stretch false. This is going to consume 200 by 200 block, which is not going to be resizable. You will not be able to make it bigger or smaller, for that matter. So this is, that's it. So I will now build this solution. It will deploy it to my to NAV. It will print the public key token here, so I can start immediately with just declaring it as a control add-in in NAV. So I go back to NAV, to control add-ins. I'm creating a new one. didn't copy it, obviously. So here, copy, and then paste. Then let me use this public key token from here. I'm putting it there. And last step is to actually create the resource file. So I'm going to this resource, and then I'll select Open Folder in File Explorer. I will select all the files inside and add them to resource.zip. And then back in my control add-ins page, I'm clicking this import button, action, sorry, and then I'm going to this folder, selecting resource.zip and clicking open. So the control add-in has been imported. So if I go back into my NAV and create create a new control and bind this control add-in TechDays simple template demo. Okay, I can see that it has those two events, control add-in ready and data on data received. So on control add-in ready, I will just do message, I am ready now, click me. 5005 TechDays simple template demo. Okay, let me run this page. So here it tells me that it's ready, click me, and here I have this HTML button, click me. So this is how you can inject your HTML code into this control add-in div. And essentially, whatever HTML you are able to develop, you're going to put in there. And everything else is just, again, your knowledge of JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, just like with the Windows forms. So I'm not going to talk today about how to develop HTML, how to develop JavaScript, and how to develop CSS. I'm going to stay in the NAV backyard. So we're going to talk about interesting things of the framework itself. And those advanced demos you just can download later on. One thing which is important, not good to know, but important to know, you cannot bind the JavaScript control to a source expression. Or in fact, you can, but it will not do anything. In 2013, R2, it might crash the client. In 2015, it won't crash the client, but won't work either. So the reason for that is that JavaScript and NAV client are running in two different applications. They are really two different applications. So even if it's the web client, you still have an iframe which loads another document. So it's not the same application. And to make two applications talk, the easiest, or actually the most stable way to do that is asynchronous. So you have asynchronous communication between NAV and the JavaScript control. And the effect of that is that you don't have, actually, since NAV cannot respond to asynchronous events, it has to stay single-threaded. When you call JavaScript, you never get any return value back. So if you send something to JavaScript, it's a one-way road. So you essentially, if you want to send, let's say, source expression to JavaScript, you call it, but you cannot expect a return value from JavaScript. It's not allowed. You cannot have a function to return a value from JavaScript to you. Also, when JavaScript calls an event in NAV, it's also a single-way street. So when the event fires, you cannot have any by reference parameters. You cannot pass anything back. So it means when I call JavaScript and I expect something back, then whichever method I've called should call me back and give me any so-called return value. And the same way, the opposite way around. So if JavaScript needs something from NAV, it needs to notify NAV, I need this. And then NAV needs to call a method in JavaScript. So essentially, this is what you need to do. When you need to pass from CAL to JavaScript, you call a method. When you need to pass something from from JavaScript to CL, you invoke an event. So let's take a look at how we can do that. I will close my development environment and my RoleTailored Client, and I'm going to open development environment again. So let me change this here. Let me change this from input type button click me to input type text. And then value is not going to be click me. I don't need any value, but I need on change is, and then I will invoke a method. So I will say call, actually send data to NAV. Sorry? Yeah, on change, and I didn't even call the function, so I need to actually call the function, so it wouldn't work anyway. Yeah, thank you. You see it better than I do. So function send data to NAV. So here, let me just call Microsoft Dynamics. Actually, let me copy it. I never remember it by heart. Maybe invoke extensibility method. And then it's called send, on data received from control. And I need to pass arguments which are defined by this data event handler. So let's take a look at this. Here I'm passing object data, which means anything, whatever. So I will just pass a value. Since it can be many parameters, I have to put them in an array. So I will just pass a string. I will call it hello world at this stage. So I will build my control. And also, let me do something here. Alert, and then data. This is send data to control. This is the method that NAV invokes. So here I will say cal says, and then whatever it says. So let me redeploy that, and let me go back to NAV. I will modify this, and here I have on data received from NAV. Here I'll say message JavaScript says, and then data, and then I will immediately call it back. So I have to assign the name here, control. So I will go to curve page, control, send data to control. Okay, I've got it. So that should do. If I run this page now, yep, that's true. Thanks. So I need to upload a new resource. So I'll delete this resource from here. We'll address this issue later, but I have a trick for that. So I'm going to control add-ins, and then selecting this simple template demo import. Now it tells me there is a resource inside already. You need to do something about it. So I'll click yes. I'm okay to override it. I'm clicking resource, and then I will run the page. So let's take a look. I'll enter something. Oops. Send data to nav is undefined. So I will not run scripts on page anymore. Obviously, I've made a typo somewhere. Yes, it's function name. It's here. It's lowercase, and it has to be. JavaScript is also case sensitive. So I will just redeploy the resource. Try it again. So I'll change something here. And here I have CL says, okay, I've got it. And then I have JavaScript says, hello world. So that's how to exchange data. It might hurt a little because it's not the way we used to. So if you want to have data-bound controls, there will be a lot of communication, actually one-way communication. So you'll have to have some triggers and events, sorry, methods and events that you will have to call, but that's the only way to do that. And now a typical question that I hear often is about this control here. See, it's kind of ugly because it has those 1800s tooltip popping up. And if we run that in the web client, okay, so it has expired, but I will restart it. Okay, so here it's different. It looks kind of 20, at least like 2010. So the question is, can I do that with my controls? Because obviously this is a Windows Forms control and JavaScript control in one single control. So the question is, can you do that? And the answer is no. Yeah, so Microsoft has hard-coded it actually. So instead of allowing us to do the same thing, maybe they do that in the future. But for now, it's essentially just a trick that they can do, but you cannot. So maybe if you would decompile their assembly and see how they have done it, you could do the same thing. That might work. But there are no clean ways to do that. So, so far we have seen basic interaction between the control and your page. And we have seen that we need to write some JavaScript. And we have seen different ways of adding JavaScript. So we have 3 ways. First one is to put them in the manifest block. The second is to load an URL from manifest, just like I've loaded jQuery, for example. And the last one is to load from resource.zip. So all of these have their pros and cons. However, there are interesting things that you could do if you do not just put your JavaScript code into the control. And imagine, like, for example, if you want to automatically update, like you want to deploy the new release of your control to all of your customers, or like whoever uses your control. If you have to deploy the resource and then depend on everybody loading the resource, it will be kind of not the best way. So why not, for example, putting it, let's say, on your web page, and then essentially having your customers automatically update the resource. Actually, the resource downloads the script every time it runs. So that could be one way. So how about that? How about another thing? How about loading the whole JavaScript dynamically? How about, like, for example, loading HTML code dynamically? Like, not even having to deploy anything to your customers, but actually having, for example, CAL code inject JavaScript or HTML code or CSS code. JavaScript is an extremely flexible language. It's probably the most beautiful language there is right now. It allows you crazy things. So, and essentially, we could have CAL pass on the full content of your control. So why would you have to put anything in a resource in the first place? Because then you have the updates problem. Why wouldn't you just control everything from CL? Or why would you have to deploy 15 different control add-ins? Why wouldn't you just have one and then supply your code into it at the runtime, depending on certain circumstances or not? So these are all the possibilities. So what I'm going to present here is an advanced control add-in template that I've developed for this presentation, and also it's going to be available for you to download. We cannot really see. Can you see those? So I'll start with this bottom at NAV. So when NAV loads the control, it will call the initialize control method in the framework. Then this initialize control will call another method called create control. It's an internal JavaScript thing only. So essentially you override this create control by supplying your HTML code there. And that HTML code can come from NAV if you want. Then this create control fires the on ready to receive control definition. This happens in NAV. So NAV has essentially a chance to supply HTML and CSS. And if it wants to supply something at this stage, it calls the send control definition to JavaScript. And it sends the HTML and the CSS. Okay? So at that stage, essentially this send control definition puts whatever you pass into it directly into that page. And then it calls the onControl rendered. It tells your CL, okay, now I've done my job, now you're ready to talk to me. That's the initialization stage. The next stage is the user interaction stage. So user enters data into the control, or essentially this would be the trigger. Like you read something from the database and then you need to pass that on to the control. So you call this send data to control, and then it does whatever it needs to do. And then user enters something in the control or changes the context in the control. Then it calls this onChange data event. This is very similar to the concept that we have seen. And we have one more stage, which is essentially dynamic execution stage. So imagine that the CAL wants to update the CSS. So for example, I want to change the style of something on the fly. I just call this update CSS. And then it updates the CSS in the page. And then we have possibility to execute code on demand. So I call from CAL, I call execute JavaScript code. I pass a string into it. And JavaScript executes that string and returns a value to me by calling the onJavaScript code executed event. So that's the advanced control-it template that I'm going to present right now, which will also simplify this development process. So I will just start with this file, new project, and then again the length thing. I'm going to select advanced control-it in, and then I will just give it a name, TechDays Advanced Template. Oh, I'm out of space. TechDays Advanced. Let's take a look at the content here. So still I have resource, I have scripts, and I have style sheets. However, I have two scripts. I have this extensibility framework script, which does all of that stuff that I've shown here. And it has this control.js, which is essentially where you need to put your code. So you need to extend this one. It has the create control. So here you can put some code into the control if you want. This is invoked from the initialization here. So it essentially inserts this div and then calls your create control thing, which then essentially passes some HTML that you want into the page. And you have the data received from CAL. Also, here, when it initializes the control, it raises the CAL event. It's essentially just a friendlier name than Microsoft.Dynamics.NAV.invoke extensibility control, which is so simple that Microsoft has even made a typo in the first release. It wasn't called invoke extensibility, but it was called extensibility. So to make it simpler, you have this raise CAL event, which kind of is friendlier. So this raise CAL event essentially calls this extensibility thing. So here we have this data received from CL. Essentially, when we deploy this control, I'm just not going to spend too much time developing from scratch, but I will just show this page which already uses it. So here, the control does nothing by itself. It's just a framework where CAL does everything. So here, the first thing that happens is on ready to receive control definition. Here I'm passing two things. I'm passing some HTML and I'm passing some CSS. So essentially, when JavaScript tells me I'm ready to receive something from you, I'm calling this send control definition to JavaScript. So it has two variables, HTML and CSS. Let's take a look at this send control definition method here. So send control definition to JavaScript receives HTML and CSS. So it appends the HTML to your control, and then it calls the update CSS method. This update CSS injects CSS to the body element at the end, which makes sure that it overrides any existing CSS. That's a nice thing about CSS. You can override existing CSS as long as you want. So this update CSS is also the function that you can call directly from CAL if you want to change. And then when it has done that, it raises the event called onControlRendered. And then I get this onControlRendered event. I can do whatever I want from there. Essentially, this is the onControlEdit ready. It tells me the initialization stage is now done. You are OK to talk to me. And then let's take a look what kind of content I've passed into it. Here I have some span, which is called ID. It has ID caption. And obviously, I'm using that ID here to style it in color red. And then the caption says enter some data. And then I have some input text where I put the onChange event, which is send data to CAL. Okay? This send data to CAL is essentially this method here. So I'm calling it. And I'm passing the content of my control. So I call myControl.val. It's, again, a jQuery function which returns the value of my input box. And essentially, send data to CAL is going to call this function here. It will raise an event called onChangeData. And here I get the onChangeData event. So what I will do here, I will update CSS. I will color it to red. And I will also execute JavaScript code. It has ID of 1, so I can know exactly which, because there can be many different invocations of JavaScript code. This is just a tag. It is completely arbitrary. And here is the JavaScript code. I say alert, hello world, and then return some value called test. Okay? Then let's take a look at what this execute JavaScript code method does. So here is the method. It essentially creates a function out of your code. And then it invokes the CAL event. It passes the ID back and executes the function, which returns whichever value it should return back to CAL. And at that stage, I get this onJavaScript code executed. And it tells me JavaScript execution completed. It tells me which ID it was, because you can call it from many different places. And it says it has the result. This is what it has received from JavaScript, basically, the result of the execution. So I run this page. Sorry, not this, but this. This is my enter some data. I will put hello TechDays2014. And I exit from here. It says hello world. So essentially, it's this onChangeData thing. This is the alert hello world. Okay? And here I can say OK. It tells me JavaScript execution completed, ID equals 1, result equals test. I can change it now without redeploying the control. So here, imagine that I don't want, I'm just going to make it simple. I will not say hello world. I will say enough of this demo. And let's change this not to green, but to blue. And we can start off not with red, but with yellow. It's not going to be too visible, but I run that. And here's my yellow. And it turns to blue, and I get this. So essentially, you can fully control the content and the execution of your JavaScript purely from CAL. You don't need any redeployment or anything. And you're fully flexible. Like, you can really develop whatever you want without having to redeploy stuff occasionally. Now, where you, where it takes this HTML and JavaScript that it executes, and CSS is completely up to you. You can put it into the blob. You can download it from somewhere. You can just hard code it in CAL if you want to. You wouldn't do that. I see you go like that. Yes, you wouldn't do that. You would probably store it somewhere. But it essentially sky's the limit. So some framework like that can really help you achieve a lot. Now, final tip for this session is how to handle the situation. So you have seen me. I've always had to create this control. I had to register this control. So instead of that, how about actually auto-registering the control? So you have company open trigger in code unit 1. It can call your code unit, which is called register controls, which inserts the control definition, which is name and public key token, into the client add-ins system table. And it also downloads the control add-in definition resource from your website and streams it into the resource blob in that table. So, and of course, it does that only if it needs to. So actually, let me demonstrate. Sorry, let me demonstrate this last tip, how I would develop that. So I'm going to my code unit register control add-ins, register custom controls. So I'll start off with control add-ins, okay? So here I will actually delete this advanced extensibility control demo. I think that's the one. Let me just make sure. The easiest way to make sure is to just check the page. Not that one. That one. So advanced extensibility control. Yeah. So I'll just delete this one. I'll just click delete. Okay. So the control is not there. If I attempt to run it, it should not work. Okay. Now it has it cached on the client side. I would have to close the client. So let me demonstrate that. I will essentially go to this, and here on run I will just call exit immediately. Then I would close this page. I'll run my page from here, test page. So it should fail. Okay, it tells me that it cannot load the control because it does not exist. I'm closing it again. I'm going back to my code unit and I'm deleting this exit. So here I have register control. What I do here is I call this local method. I pass the name of the control, the public key token. These are defined by you, so you can just hard code them in here. Version, description, they are arbitrary. And here you have the resource file, which comes from internet. Okay, so it's a resource demo for my blog. So I pass that on to register control. If the client add-in exists, it doesn't execute this. So if the client client add-in does not exist, it actually first inserts. Sorry, let me increase the size because I'm not sure if you can really see that from the back row. So it first inserts. Yeah, I'm not used to that magnifier, but I've seen Microsoft do that in their presentations. I thought it was cool, but I have to practice more. So it first inserts the control add-in. And then if you supply the resource download URL, it calls this download control. And now this download control is also smart. So first it checks, okay, if we don't have this control add-in, then it just exits because it cannot import a resource for a non-existent control. And then if it has value, okay, it exits. So I don't want to download every time. So if I have a value in there, I'm keeping that, okay? But if I don't have a value in there, then I essentially do the trick from yesterday's presentation. I instantiate an instance of web client on the server side. I define the URI out of my download URL. I download it into a memory stream. Then I create an out stream on my resource field. I copy my memory stream, which contains my zip file, into this out stream, and I modify the client add-in. So essentially, this is all you need to do. So I'll save this, and I'm going to run the page. You remember it didn't run last time, so I'm running it. It should fail because I don't have the control. Why is it taking so much time to run the client? Is it the resource download and there is no internet, or did I click run at all? No, I didn't. I could wait. Yeah, for ages. Let me just click run. Okay. I could have waited, you know. And there it is. So, and now, you know, if I go into control-ins and find my control and just click remove, so I'm removing the resource, okay? The next time I run, it will download because there is no resource, so it indicates, okay, you need to get the new one, the latest version from the URL. And you get it in here, and essentially that's the same thing. So that was all I had to show. I think I was a little bit too fast. We have 20 minutes left, but it just gives us enough time for Q&A. So for more information, follow my blog. I have blogged quite a lot about control-ins, and there will be more. All of this stuff, everything that I've shown here today is going to be on my blog in a couple of hours, and then you can take it, play with it, and abuse it to the maximum extent allowed under international copyright laws, and I give it open source to you. So let's talk about your questions. Yeah, can somebody? If the question is smart, you get a shirt. If not, I keep the shirt. Yeah, okay, but there were two questions up there. I would like to address them. Yeah, let's get this one first. We have enough time, so everyone will have a chance. Yeah.
What about positioning and sizing of the controls inside the page?
So that's a very good question. If we talk about controls in Windows Forms,
yes.
Windows Forms, if you have seen my trick at the beginning, this, how I called it, semi-transparent, borderless, draggable, something, whatever, with tricks such as that, you essentially can access anything on the Windows form and resize, change styles, change color. Here's the shirt. You're welcome. So essentially, you can use that to do fancy stuff with Windows Forms. With JavaScript, you're very limited because you cannot access the parent of the JavaScript. If you're in the Windows client and you host a JavaScript control, there is no way JavaScript could talk to Windows Forms and do something about it. So really no way. You would have to have another control and then from JavaScript call that control, but it would kind of violate the reason why you have JavaScript in the first place. And if you're in the web browser, then you have a security issue because you have an iframe. And again, security rules will not allow you to talk to the parent page. So you're very limited. You can define the size. So you can say, I need 200 by 100 frame, and I want it to be resizable, for example, like I want horizontal stretch, yes or no, or vertical stretch, yes or no, but that's it. So no positioning, no precise positioning. If you really need precise positioning for whatever reason, then maybe the best thing is to simply consume all the space available with your control, not put any NAV controls, and then just do everything in JavaScript. But that would kind of be, yeah, maybe an overkill, but that's a possibility. Okay. We had two questions up there.
Oh, yeah. In the middle.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I was just wondering, at the moment you can't do control add-ins on a repeater. Is that something that's likely to change?
Sorry, I didn't catch.
Oh, sorry. You can't do a control add-in on a repeater in a page?
Okay. Yes, that's true. So you cannot add a control add-in to the repeater.
I was just wondering, is that something that might change, or is it?
So honestly, I would not expect Microsoft to change that because it's not that it would be technically even difficult, not impossible, but it would kind of allow you to break the repeater itself because then you could just put anything inside of it. And then, you know, repeater kind of could get like all scrambled on the page. However, again, since it is a Windows Forms control, you can access it once you place your Windows Forms control in there. It can talk to any other control on the page, repeater included. It's essentially nothing but a data grid, or not really a data grid. It inherits few levels from data grid. But then you can get that control. You can really find it by name because you can see all the names of the controls inside the page. And then you could play with it yourself. Like you could see, like find the cells that you need to put something of your own inside, like the background color, for example, or something like that. That would be possible, yes. But it's, I'm pretty sure Microsoft would kind of frown upon the stuff that I've shown at the beginning of this presentation and this thing that I've just explained. But it is possible, yeah. Okay, I would really like, there is a gentleman in the last row here. I would like him to be the next. So, okay, yes, we have a question there.
Okay, let me ask you.
I apologize. Actually, whoever has asked the question, get the shirt later here, okay? I count on your honesty, okay? Good.
Okay, let me ask you, what type of data can flow between JavaScript functions and NAV? Can you send recs or not? Records?
Records.
Or,
no,
or other type of objects?
Yeah. You cannot send records, but that's not because JavaScript will be unable to handle them. It's because NAV doesn't allow you to. So you cannot assign record variable or any NAV built-in complex data type to anything outside the CL domain. So you cannot set records. But other than that, I could say just about anything. You have seen that I've been dragging images from my folder onto the JavaScript control, which has somehow stored them in the database. So it is really anything. It's whatever NAV receives is system.object. It's some kind of serialized whatever, probably some binary data that you have. But really anything that JavaScript can handle in memory, it can pass on to NAV. So really, really anything. There was a question here in the last row. I would like that one next. So.
So the short question is about the manifest. So manifest contains information about the width and the size of the window to consume for the control add-in. Is there any way to retrieve this information for example, from NAV when we're talking about the NAV side controlled JavaScript add-ins?
That's a good question. I anticipated this one. It's actually not that I know of. So as far as I know, there is no possibility of you to retrieving the size. What you could do is you could call JavaScript and then call those measurements functions inside jQuery to tell you the size of the client that it consumes. That's something that you could do. But what you cannot do is you cannot influence that size from NAV.
So like I cannot basically tell on the runtime to replace these values in the manifest. So, okay, this time this add-in size is 200 to 400. Next time is 100 to 500 because it's a different control add-in this time.
Not that I know of.
Okay.
So maybe, you know, it doesn't mean it is not possible. Maybe it is, and maybe it's even simple. It's just that I never tried it. I know that you cannot dynamically, let's say, inject something into the manifest. So that thing you cannot do. But if there is some fancy JavaScript framework which allows you to kind of resize those controls with the parents in respect to them, which I don't think so because it is really an iframe, I wouldn't expect that to be possible. But yes, I just say I don't know of that.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yeah, we have a question here. There's a lot of questions.
Is there a smart way of debugging JavaScript?
Sorry, didn't understand.
Is there a smart way to debug the JavaScript? Or browsers tend to interpret the JavaScript differently, so...
Yes, there is a smart way to debug it, I don't know of a way to debug it live. So you would have to have a test project, and then essentially you would have to have your HTML page, which essentially hosts your control, and then you debug it using Internet Explorer development tools, or whichever Chrome or Firefox development tools. So you could do that, and then when you debug and test it, you actually deploy it. But live debugging, I don't know how to do that. Again, not to say it's not possible, just I don't know. Sorry? There you go. So you could use the web client, really. Thanks. Yeah, smart trick. This deserves a shirt outright, so there you go.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. We had a question here in front row. So.
The JavaScript and overridden from or controlled from the NAV client?
I think yes. You know, I'm really not a JavaScript guy. I don't know it inside out. I think yes. As far as I know, there are many events exposed through jQuery, so you could respond to many fancy events. Does anybody know? The question was, do we have key events like on key press, on mouse down, and yeah, there we go. So. I won't have that many shirts, you know, so.
Yes, for the client add-ins Windows forms, we have this possibility to use big text and stream an XML port into the add-in. So I can put the record to my .NET control. Is there a possibility to do the same trick with jQuery and build a data grid inside?
Yes, there is. I would just not, I wouldn't use, with jQuery, you're better off with using JSON. So you would have to stream it somehow into JSON, basically turn your XML into JSON. That shouldn't be difficult. Now, absolutely, you can load, let's say, Kendo UI grid or like whatever grid in JavaScript, show it on your page, and then load whichever kind of data it expects. You could pass it from NAV. I'm pretty sure you could even do that with XML directly. It's just that, you know, again, it depends on the control that you're using. But yes, it's possible. Sorry? We have 10 minutes left, so just let's do it. This seems to be an interesting topic, right?
I want to ask, when you have events in the control, and you have like worked on it 2 weeks, and then you have already code in NAV, and then you put a new event to it, and you will have to reload the control, you lose all the code.
That's a big problem, actually. So if your interface definition changes, so you define it once, and the purpose of that interface is twofold. First is to explain to JavaScript what is inside, but not really for that. Primarily, it explains to CAL which, let's say, events are in there, because it needs to add events. Events are problematic. So if you change the interface, add a new event, you have to go unbind the control, which kills the event triggers that you have, and then rebind the control, which just gives you the empty triggers. So that's why it's the best thing to do is just follow the PRS principles. Like do not put any code into those triggers. Just call simple functions from there. So in the worst case, you would add functions to the page and put your code there, and then just call, like if you have onDataReceived trigger, you wouldn't code this in the onDataReceived. You would put that in the onDataReceive method, and then from onDataReceived, you would call onDataReceive. And then it's easier, because then you just put that code back. But this is painful. So yes, this is a big problem. Maybe they fix that somehow with like development environment tools, refresh interface for controls or whatever. That would be perfect, but right now you have to do it manually. Yeah.
I was happy to hear that Microsoft auto-deploy the add-ins, but yesterday I heard they are not. That's not always done. And now I have the question: how to make sure that all users have the same version of the client add-in? We see the download method, but with Windows forms and so on, we have a problem.
Yeah. So there would be ways to detect if everybody has the same version, because your control add-in is nothing but a .NET thing, if we're talking about Windows controls. Because the problem that you just put is not a problem for JavaScript, because everybody has the same version because it comes from the resource. You cannot have an older version unless you keep your RoleTailored Client open for a million of years, in which case it would happen. But with Windows Forms controls, what you could do, since all of them are really just nothing but .NET controls, .NET classes, each of them have a type, and they are already signed with strong name. What you could do is do can load type, and test whichever type you need. So you can test if everybody has this version 4 type. So you would have to use versioning. So you would have to attach a version tag to your assemblies. But when you do that, you could easily say, like, if can load type, and then you put the latest one, then you do your stuff. And then whoever doesn't have the latest stuff, you throw an error. You say, like, sorry, contact your administrator or whoever. So that would be a trick, for example. Yep, you're welcome. We had more questions. We don't have any more questions. Come on. Lunch will wait. Okay, up there.
The event trigger in NAV seems to offer, in general, only one parameter. Is there a way to extend that?
Yes.
Except of using the text file?
Yeah, you can put as many as you want. So I've actually used 2 in my demo here. So when I was sending this on JavaScript executed, it had 2 parameters. So you can put as many as you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that just new in 2015?
No. You just need to define your delegate. So you need to define your delegates for your events. First, you declare a delegate method, which is a template for the event, and then you create an event from that delegate. So if you needed it, like an event with 5 parameters, you create a delegate which has 5 parameters of specific types, and then you simply just create an event from that delegate. So,
okay,
yeah, it's simple. It's take a look at the code when you download it, and you will see how it's done here. Anything else? More questions? Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And have a good time at the remainder of the conference.